The Black education movement evolved over a couple of decades, beginning in the middle to the late 1960s. It grew out of the agitation of Caribbean parents for quality schooling for their children. Although schooling in the Caribbean under colonial rule was modeled on the English schooling system, white teachers and parents believed that Caribbean children were backward and generally incapable of high attainment. Caribbean parents, on the other hand, had high aspirations for their children and expected British schools to enable them to be successful. Instead, most schools had low expectations of Black children and equated the lack of proficiency in standard English with a range of learning difficulties, if not cognitive disabilities. From about 1967 onwards, for example, the North London West Indian Association, the Haringey West Indian Parents Association, and other such groupings in London campaigned against banding, a practice that resulted in Black children being placed in the lowest achievement bands, where most of them remained even after they demonstrated that they could access the curriculum and perform as well as, if not better than, children in higher bands. Those negative attitudes to Black children, based upon race and class, led to those children being discriminated against in two other ways, both extremely damaging. One was the practice of busing Black children away from their own neighborhood schools to schools elsewhere because their local schools had more than 30% Black children. The Department for Education encouraged busing on the grounds that a greater concentration of Black children in any one school would impair the learning of the majority of white students. In Haringey, Ealing, Shepherd's Bush, and other cities outside London, Black parents mobilized and campaigned until busing was stopped. The other and even more pernicious practice was that of placing disproportionate numbers of Black children in schools for the educationally subnormal. A number of West Indian organizations, mainly in London, led by the Caribbean Education and Community Workers Association, campaigned against that practice and eventually compelled the government and local education authorities to change their practices. That campaign included commissioning one of the few Caribbean teachers in the country at the time, Bernard Cord, to write up research he had done on the subject. His seminal work, How the West Indian Child is Made Educationally Subnormal in the British School System, was published by New Beacon Books in 1971. There were three other major building blocks of the Black education movement, namely the Black Supplementary School movement, starting in 1968 in Birmingham and 1969 in London, the Caribbean Teachers Association, founded in 1974, and the Black Parents Movement, founded in 1975. So, has there been a legacy left by the Black education movement? The Black education movement is still alive and well, though not as dynamic as it was in that early period of the 1960s and 70s. It represents the African diaspora's response to ongoing challenges in schooling and education, including the disproportionate number of black children, boys in particular, being excluded from school year on year, populating pupil referral units, and being caught in what has become known as the school to prison pipeline. The BEM also encompasses struggles for equality of outcomes for black students in higher education and for the employment and progression of black teachers and school managers, as well as struggles for the decolonizing of pedagogy, of the curriculum, and indeed of schooling itself. Why is this archive collection important for now and for future generations? This archive collection represents a critical part of the history of black settlement in post-war Britain and the struggle for education rights for British-born black people. It is a history of Britain's failure to confront the legacy of empire and the racism that it spawned, and to ensure that the society worked to eliminate racism through schooling and education. Black and white people of this and future generations have an imperative to build a future Britain together, and one that is not constructed on the scattered ruins of Britain's racist past and present. There is therefore much to unlearn and debunk if this and future generations are to shape and pursue a vision of a future Britain that bears the hallmark of equity and of racial and social justice. One would like to think that they would find this archive collection an essential tool as they learn from the failures and the advances of the past.